All right, everyone, welcome back from lunch. I hope you're now filled with energy as we take on the OECD policy development over time. My name is Elinor Odeberg, and I'm the chief economist at the think tank Arena ID, and I have the pleasure of moderating this session, which is about OECD thinking on labor markets and collective bargaining and its changes over time. And we have two presenters with us, Sandrine Cases and Alexander Hijzens, senior economists at the Directorate for Employment, Labor and Social Affairs of the OECD, and they also contribute to the OECD Employment Outlook. I see some policy junks here in the audience that probably read that page to page. And after that, we will have a panel, but the floor is yours, Sandrine and Alexander, for about 30-minute presentation. Thank you.
So, as well, many thanks for the invitation to participate in this event. As Alex said, I'm going to discuss more in detail the OECD work on collective bargaining and labor relations, drawing basically on the work we've been conducting for several years at the OECD as part of the reassessment of the job strategy. The rationale was, Alex mentioned it, to account for the new mega trends, technological changes, demographic changes, etc., but also the new labor market patterns, and also provide new, maybe more robust evidence on the role of collective bargaining for labor market outcomes, going also beyond just the employment outcome, but also looking at job quality, resilience, and other outcomes. Thank you very much. Can you see my slide now? Can you see my slide?
Yes, yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, so it's interesting to note that more generally, there has been a remarkable regain in interest in the role of collective bargaining and social dialogue across OECD countries. So at policy levels, so we had the recommendation, the EU recommendation on social dialogue, but also some other countries are interested in reintroducing sectoral bargaining, like we had the case of New Zealand and Chile. There were also a couple of tripartite, bipartite agreements, Spain, Portugal, and other countries, but also at research levels has been a number of academic papers on the role of collective bargaining and unions. And it is true that collective bargaining performs functions that are still relevant today. So I'm going to argue that collective bargaining is not a thing of the past. It's a very useful and relevant instrument. So first of all, it provides social peace. So employers and workers still need a mechanism to negotiate compromises. And in absence of collective bargaining, state regulation is likely to fill the gap, which would be a less flexible solution and would not be able to tailor solution at firms level, for instance. At the same time, the weakening of collective bargaining leaves the door open to other forms of social conflicts, such as boycotts or social media campaigns. Collective bargaining provides also a way to address the market failures associated with power imbalance on the labor market that Alex flagged, such as labor market monopsony, or also the decoupling between wages and productivity. And finally, the right to collective bargaining remain a very relevant protection for workers in vulnerable positions. Another argument as why collective bargaining is an important instrument, is that it can ease transition in a changing world of work. I'm going to go quickly on that slide. So collective bargaining can help companies to find solutions to emerging problems in a flexible and pragmatic way and fair manner. So there were a couple, for instance, of collective agreements signed on work-life balance, which were signed at firm levels. Collective bargaining can also shape the design and definition of new rights, for instance, the right to disconnect, but we have also a few examples of agreements to address AI issues, but also improve existing ones, for instance, training. And finally, collective bargaining can complement government efforts in strengthening labor market security and adaptability. And of course, in Sweden, you are perfectly aware of the role of the Swedish job security councils, which provide active support and guidance to displaced workers. However, collective bargaining systems are facing a number of challenges. So first, as you can see on the left part of my slide, the first challenges comes from the declining number of workers who are members of trade unions. If you can see the orange line, which is for the OECD average, you can see that the decline was from about 30% in 1985 to 16% in 2020. Employers' organization density differs also across countries. Data are more scarce on this, but employers' organization has been rather stable in general, except for a few countries. However, and this is the other challenge, collective bargaining coverage, which is the share of workers covered by a collective agreement, has been also declining. And if you look at the orange line for the OECD, it declined from about 46% in 1985 to 32% in 2019. These so-called all challenges are magnified by recent labor market trends. And in particular, here you can see with the development of non-standard forms of work, these workers tend to be underrepresented by trade union. If you compare the orange bar and diamond, this is again the average for the OECD, you can see that so for permanent workers, this is a diamond, and the bar is for non-standard workers. Non-standard workers are 50% less likely to be unionized than standard workers. That's for the OECD. I'm not going to enter into details as why it is so. There are probably a couple of factors to explain this gap between the two trade union density. But it is clear that there exist legal obstacles, notably for non-salaried workers, for independent workers, to organize and sign collective agreements because of the existence of antitrust regulation that may consider such a collective agreement as a cartel. Finally, and I will stop with the challenges, we also saw during the recent cost of living crisis that negotiated wages were reacting more slowly or with some delay, as you can see from the charts, mostly because of the staggered and rather infrequent nature of wage agreements, and also the fact that those were limited and they were partly indexed to inflation. Now, moving from the work on collective bargaining. By the way, we produced a flagship report providing all these results. That's called Negotiating Our Way Up. Let me just quickly flag 5 lessons from our work. The first one is that a collective bargaining system goes beyond its degree of centralization. Regarding this, there has been in the past somehow too much emphasis on the level of bargaining after the work of Calmfors and Driffield and their hypothesis. Yet this proved somehow too simplistic in the sense that, as you can see, collective bargaining systems are sort of complex box with different other variables likely to be critical for the functioning of system, of which coordinations, but also all the mechanisms, rules, extensions, or possibility to opt out, the existence of favorable principle, for instance, that at the end are likely to impact the actual outcomes of collective bargaining. The second lesson is that it's important at the same time, as I just said, to account for the granularity of collective bargaining systems, so somehow zoom in the system, but also to zoom out and understand how the system as a whole functions, the interactions between the different parameters and components. So we did that exercise, and we produced taxonomy, if you want, of collective bargaining system to compare the systems, and we came up with 5 main types. Again, that I'm not going to comment in details, but maybe just flagging the one in the middle, which is the organized, decentralized, and coordinated systems, where most of the Nordic countries are part of, with also Germany. And organized, decentralized, coordinated systems, in these systems, sector-level agreements play an important role, but they leave significant room for firm-level agreements to set the standards. And a key element in the systems is also coordination, strong coordination. Quickly, the third lesson, which is a follow-up to the previous one, as I just said, there are different ways of introducing flexibility in sectoral systems. You have on the left, like Sweden. So in these systems, sector agreements define the broad framework, but leave large scope for bargaining at firm establishment level. And on the right, this is Germany, where sectoral agreements allow deviation at a lower level via the so-called opening or opt-out clauses. The fourth lesson is that it takes two to tango. So to bargain, basically, you need a counterpart. And here we have the key role of employers' organization. As you can see from the panels on the left, sorry, in countries where collective bargaining predominantly takes place at sector level, higher coverage is driven by higher employers' densities. That's panel B. While in countries with collective bargaining predominantly takes place at company level, coverage is more likely to be driven by high trade union density. And the fifth lesson is that a secret important ingredient for the Nordic models to function is the essential role played by mediation offices in solving collective action problem and enforcing agreements. However, relatively little is known on this topic, notably in a cross-country perspective. And in fact, we are just launching a new project at the OECD comparing how the different mediation offices in the 5 Nordic countries function, the resources they have, etc., and how they deliver. And this is my last final slide, which basically would be let's say the policy conclusion from what the OECD maybe has been thinking on collective bargaining. So I think the message is really that design matters. So the OECD would be extremely supportive of collective bargaining system. Not all of them. Those are well-designed, are well-functioning, those that manage to balance inclusiveness and flexibility. So inclusiveness, how do you achieve inclusiveness? Well, inclusiveness implies a high coverage and is best achieved through broad-based social partners and or through well-designed extensions. However, these extensions have to be designed carefully because they may hurt the small firms. How do you achieve flexibility? Well, flexibility, as just explained, calls for the use of framework sectoral agreements to be tailored at the firm level or through system of opt-out. This is the organized decentralization. but also extremely important to ensure wage coordination, to help negotiators internalize the macroeconomics of collective agreements. Second, it's very important to adapt the access to collective bargaining. So in enforcing the correct classification of workers and fighting misclassification of workers as self-employed, if in fact they are almost like employees, like they are extremely dependent economically. Also important to adapt existing regulations. So I'm talking about labor and competition regulation to grant the right to bargain. And finally, social partners may also need to adapt, and they're actually doing so. They are diversifying their strategies and adapting their structure to reach out non-standard workers, to allow, for instance, self-employed to join, etc., and also addressing new challenges such as development of AI. And I stop here and I thank you. And I think both Alex and myself will be happy to take some questions. Just, some further reading in case you're interested to know more about our work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
Sandrine and Alexander. I do have some follow-ups before we welcome our panel, and I know that Alexander and Sandrine will also join for the panel discussion. When I read the job strategies and I listen to your presentation, my impression is that the overall normative view has shifted from a flexibilization of the labor force in terms of job insecurity, reducing social benefits, particularly unemployment insurance, individual rather than collective bargaining and tax cuts, maybe in the 90s, towards a more labor-friendly, if you will, policy palette where you recommend unionization, collective bargaining, social dialogue to increase productivity, and that the tone is no longer just growth in general, but inclusive growth. And I'm just curious what you think is the main force behind this shift that we see in modern labor economics as well as in the policy palette of the OECD. Would it have been better for labor market outcomes if these flexibilization strategies were never put in place, or were they needed at that time and now we have new challenges? So flexibilization is no longer the answer. Like, what do you think is the main source of this shift, basically?
Maybe I can start because it relates very much to my presentation. So I think that there is still a belief that sufficient flexibility in product and labor market remains important. It's important for relocation. It's important for firms to grow and to benefit from opportunities that are presented. But it's no longer sufficient, as I mentioned in my presentation. And I think this is mainly a result of changing policy priorities. So in the 1990s, there was high emphasis on unemployment. There was a lack of growth. There was a sense that there was more flexibility needed to reduce unemployment. Jumping ahead 25 years was a very different context, and so the employment was at record high, but there were the big concern was inequality, which is totally absent from previous job strategies, and so that required a broadening of the objective function from just promoting jobs to promoting good labor market performance much more generally. And once you broaden this objective function, you start thinking about labor market policies and institutions quite differently. Whereas before, you think basically only about the side effects, the negative side effects of unemployment insurance on employment. Now you also start thinking about how unemployment insurance can improve labor market matching and lead to better job quality outcomes and productivity. And so that applies basically for almost all labor market policy institutions that were previously evaluated a little bit on their secondary effects, their side effects, not the reason why they were there, right? They were often there to improve job quality outcomes or social objectives. So this shift in policy objectives, which was a function of changing circumstances to some extent, has led, I think, to a much more balanced assessment of policies and institutions without necessarily changing completely how, say, different institutions work. I think we still know from the literature that unemployment insurance can, reduce job search and lead to prolong the unemployment spell. But it also, helps supporting incomes and the positives. So it becomes all much more balanced. So I wouldn't emphasize too much that there is a fundamental change in the way we think about the policies, but because we evaluate them in a more comprehensive way, it leads to a very different assessment. And of course, it's true that, as I mentioned in the presentation, there is a little bit of a shift in terms of there's much more attention now to imperfectly competitive labor markets and what that means. But it's also, taking labor market institutions seriously, right? So why are they there? What does it mean in an imperfectly competitive labor market, and what are their consequences? I think it's through more systematically.
And you're emphasizing.
Sorry, if I may just add a few. No, I think, as Alex said, there is this change of context and the development of all these new forms of work, this kind of things. There was also the fact that some structural reforms did not deliver. That's also, at least regarding collective bargaining, there have been some, very extreme reforms of collective bargaining that proved not to be functioning. And the overall agenda somehow, at the OECD, we also moved to the well-being agenda, right? With all the work of, so it was important also to promote well-being, job quality outcomes, etc. And in that sense, it's interesting also to see that we also developed arguments showing why also from an economic point of view, collective bargaining is delivering. Not only, the usual, protective function, etc., but the fact that well-functioning collective bargaining deliver, on a number of economic outcomes. That was also important to flag this.
So if I understand it correctly, new policy goals have sort of balanced these conflicts of interest a little bit better, and it's one of the forces behind this shift. I was also curious, just before we welcome our panel, what role has modern labor economics played in this development? Nobel Prize winner David Card, for example, would indicate a more empirical focus in the modern labor market research. How much of a role do you think that has played, that modern labor market research seems to be more empirical than the former, that was more based on theoretical ideas of perfect markets and our behaviors? If you have a short comment.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very interesting question. I think many of the ideas by David Card that have become now more widely accepted, but they were already there when the first job study was done. So his famous paper on minimum wages was in the mid-90s. So many of the ideas were already there, but they did not have as much policy impact as they have now. So it took quite a long time for them to really, reach the consensus among policymakers as well. And I think it's fair to say that in the context of the original job study, the model of perfect competition was still very much more important. At the same time, it's a bit surprising because all countries have labor market policy institutions which are often difficult to rationalize in a model of perfect labor markets. So there was somewhere a consensus that we needed to have labor market policy institutions, but a lot of the policy reasoning was still in this competitive labor markets framework, which is a bit of a contradiction. And I wasn't there yet. In a debate. So I find it difficult to square now, and I feel that now that we're getting much closer between what is becoming the consensus in the academic literature, what's the research saying, and the consensus in policy. So I don't know whether there will be a new job strategy in a few years, but I find it very difficult to imagine that it will lead to very big changes in what we're saying now, just because we take this broader perspective and we have this better connection with, I think, with the academic environment.
And sorry, if I may add also, for collective bargaining, I think it was also clear that, very often evidence for collective bargaining was drawing on like two variables, like coordination and centralization, and that's it. So it was important to go in the granularity, document, etc., and be able to do more fine-tune work on collective bargaining. That was an important aspect.
Thank you very much, Sandrine and Alexander, for now. Now let's turn to our panel. I learned yesterday that in Denmark, the Fiscal Policy Council are called the Vise Men, the wise men. So here's my panel of wise men to comment on this. And I will start actually with you, Adnan. You are a senior policy advisor at TUAC, the trade union advisory committee to the OECD. You have a history here at LO as well. And I want to pick your brain first. Do you think that this evolvement, where collective bargaining agreements are emphasized, social dialogue, is thanks to TUAC's hard work, or is it rather the opposite, that we've seen very disastrous result in the decline of the labor share and working power? So we sort of need to make this move now. What are your thoughts?
So many thanks for the invitation to participate here, and I would also like to say that TUAC's General Secretary Veronica Nilsson appreciates the invitation and would like to be here, but due to other meetings, that was not possible. And also many thanks to Sandrine and Alexander for their great presentation. Regarding your question, I believe that it's really hard to evaluate who's responsible for the impact and for the quite remarkable shift actually in around labor market policies within the OECD. But we see that this shift has been active not only at the OECD, but also at the World Bank, at IMF, at Modern Research, as you mentioned. And I believe that there's a combination of efforts, not only by TUAC and the trade unions, also from Sweden, but also that we see that models, the Anglo-Saxon models, have not delivered as the opponents argued in the 90s. We see that a lot of inequality has increased due to the fact that labor market institutions have been deregulated, and we see the sharp rise in precarious work and non-standard work, and these are actually they're caused by so much deregulation that we have seen.
Roger Mörtvik, you were State Secretary for the previous government. You have a long history within the trade union movement, both on a European and national level. And I'm curious to hear, you who have followed this development of the OECD carefully, what are your thoughts when you hear these presentations?
Yes, thank you for the presentations and for the invitation as well. Well, I was a member of the TUAC plenary committee and in 2006 when the first recessed job strategy was introduced. And for me, from my perspective, it was kind of an intellectual clash for the OECD, because the OECD's role has been to show the best practice, it was thought as an economic think tank for the rich countries in the world. And the 1994 job study was put forward like there is one road to Rome. There is one size that fits all. But what we saw in the years before 2006, when the OECD tried to find out what happened with those countries, mostly the Anglo-Saxon countries that followed the 1994 suggestions. And the OECD showed that, well, they performed quite well in employment and economic performance and so on. But the Nordic countries and the Netherlands performed even better when it comes to employment, when it came to income inequality, and so on. So actually, what they said in 2006 was that there is a choice. You can either follow the Anglo-Saxon road, and you can have a rather good employment performance, but there will be a cost. Huge income inequalities. But they also said, or you can do like the Nordic countries. You can perform even better, but it will come with a cost, higher taxes. And what they also said was that what you gain from the swings you often lose on the roundabouts. When it comes to the 2006 reassessed strategy, to take an example, when it comes to the effects of unemployment insurance benefits, Bazanin and Duval actually said, the economists, major economists behind this study said, what you gain with lower unemployment benefits in shorter unemployment periods, you lose in a matching quality and productivity. So you must make a choice. You can have some policies that will make the economy perform better, but there will be a welfare cost. So I think the most important lesson of all this is that there is always falls down to a political choice. What kind of country do we want to build?
Patrick, Joyce, you're the chief economist at Almega, employer organization of the service sector. What is your takeaway? What we're hearing from both previous and Sandrine and Alexander saying that firm wage setting power is a problem on the labor market. Also saying that the Nordic countries are in fact very monopolistic in their labor markets. What is your responsibility as an employer organization? I think, is this a time to do a commercial for privatizations, to have more diverse employers in the public sector, or do you have other takeaways? I'm giving you a free argument here, but...
Sure. Thank you very much for the invitation and also the presentation, of course. Well, I think I don't argue that we don't have perfect competition in the Swedish labor market. I wouldn't argue for that. There is perfect competition, seldom exists, very few markets. But what I think they miss out is that, I mean, even though there is some employer power in the market, it's also counterbalanced by very strong unions in Sweden. We have higher organization level, and when we had Sandrine made a big argument for collective bargaining and the social use of that, but we have collective bargaining between strong employers, organizations, and workers' organization is a keystone of the Swedish labor market. It has always been.
So a question to you and maybe the three of you as well. Do you think if we say we would theoretically just have one employer in the service sector, but 100% union density, would it not be a problem for the functioning of it?
That doesn't sound like a nice society to live in.
No, I'm not. I'm just from the perspective of wage setting powers. Is that enough as a countervailing force to have a high degree of unionization?
I think you always need competition on both sides of the bargaining table. And I would, as you led me into it, I would say one of the parts of the labor market where we have monopolistic power is within the public sector. If you work within education or healthcare, you will find as women, most women are employed there, they find that even though they can change employers, they can move from one school to another or from one hospital to another, they almost always face the same employer with the same set of wage levels and other working conditions there. There, I think, as a representative of Almega, we organize many private providers, and that our organization would rather help to increase competition and actually increase workers' power in those markets.
But that's interesting. I mean, if we look at it empirically, because that's part of the pitch from Almega of privatizations, that it would be beneficial for the workers. Do we see that in hard data?
Can I just follow up on that? Well, one thing that sort of holds it back is, of course, in the long run, in the end, it's the public purse that pays for everything. So even the private providers, their budget is set by how much the public sector is willing to devote resources to those fields. So I mean, but if you could bring in more private financing within those areas, you could. Then the levels could change. But right now, the budget is almost the same for a private provider as for a public provider. But it still gives some lee room and some alternatives for the employees.
Then we come back to the taxes, as Roger mentioned. Oskar Nordström Krantz, professor in economics at Uppsala University. the framing of this conference is sort of that we're all lagging behind this modern labor research and this shift that has been presented here, or if you would want to call it a shift or not, I am at least, by that Alexander and Sandrine just told us about. Do you agree that we are not catching up, or is it rather that the international academic field is finally understanding what we've always known, the importance of collective bargaining agreements and social dialogue?
Oh, that's a hard question to answer. It depends, of course, who we are in this setting. I mean, I think there's a couple of things to keep in mind. One is, of course, there's been a big change in research, as often happens. But of course, it's very easy to misrepresent the past. No serious, I mean, no economist thought or considered the labor market to be a perfect market in the past either. All of our interest was in imperfections in terms of search frictions, involuntary unemployment, and these kinds of imperfections. We're just studying a different facet of imperfections now, and our models are richer in some aspects, richer in terms of the firms, and aspects related to that. So we learn a lot more about geographical concentration and these kind of things, but maybe then skipping some other things. There's less emphasis on involuntary unemployment, the job search process, the matching process, and these kind of things. So these are all trade-offs, but it's not, if we characterize research from the past as assuming that the labor market was perfect, it's not true. So that's important. We're emphasizing different types of imperfections now, so we learn a lot of new things from that. So that's important. The other thing is, of course, what sort of the transition from the research to the policy. And here, for sure, there's been a change in the OECD thinking about these things, so it's much easier to accept the sort of more mature, holistic perspective you get from the OECD now than in the past. But I also kind of miss the old perspective from the OECD because it was very clear that they had, a value added to the discussion because they were always emphasizing the restructuring and the perspective that labor also is an input factor and it has to be put to an efficient use and that promotes growth. It's also one very important aspect. So I was very happy to see Alex have that perspective still on his last slide about the reallocation and that aspect. So it's important that OECD keeps that because it's something that doesn't grow naturally from the domestic discussions, I think. So that perspective is really important, that OECD is almost the only one who lifts that perspective. In particular now when firms have a tendency just to ask for, I don't know, compensation for whatever electricity bill or whatever shit is happening. They just want more money. I think that's it's really bad, right? So we need creative destruction on the labor market, and I think OECD is the ones who are always pushing for that. So that's really important. And then I would say that the third thing about collective agreements and research. So that's a really important thing, and there's been a huge shift in the research interest internationally, which is great. But I would also like to say that if you think of Sweden here, we're lagging behind here. And that's the reason for that is because of the social partners. So for 25 years, I've been on places like this, always hearing from the social partners, why you don't care about collective agreements, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, there's no data. And why is there no data? Now there's data in every other country than in Sweden on collective agreements. The social partners does not give us the data on which firms are covered by which collective agreements. So we cannot study it. In the past, there were only like goofballs like me who were interested in this just because we thought it was generally interesting. Now there's a huge research field. I could publish great things. So I'm even more interested and more people are interested, but we still don't have the data. So, and that's not true for other countries. So, but it's great because we can learn from other countries where people can actually do good studies on this. But in Sweden, we cannot.
Adnan or Patrick, why aren't you more generous with the data?
I didn't expect this question, so I don't think I can answer, but okay. That's more a legal stance. But I would like just, as I have the floor, to say that, I mean, what I don't get from this presentation is that they promote the idea of collective bargaining and that should be strengthened. But I think, I mean, collective bargaining of wages has a central role in our model. I can't see in which way it should be strengthened more in Sweden.
Do the other panelists have an idea? Roger?
not just on that, but I would like to stress another thing about bargaining. I think collective bargaining is a key issue, but not just any collective bargaining. I think the success story for Sweden and Nordic countries is the coordinated collective bargaining. And to understand why we have been able to be so successful, we must understand that this is contextual. The collective bargaining system couldn't work without the institutional support from unemployment benefit, from active labor market policies and welfare schemes and so on. So, and this leads me to a question that I would like to pass on to you then, because if the results of changes in, let's say, unemployment benefits and minimum wages are so social and economic national dependent on the settings in the national institutions, how is it really possible to import research results from Anglo-Saxon countries and put it in the Swedish context? Because, for instance, in 2006, when we had a new right-wing government, in the finance bill, it said a 10 percentage point reduction in unemployment benefit would increase female employment with 1.2 percentage points. That is not true. But that was the idea. It's a very simple way of describing the result of research, because then we important results from, for instance, from US. Is it possible to use research in that kind of way?
I have a great answer to you. And that answer is Alex here. So he's a force of nature and a hero in this setting, because so I mean, we can learn from each other. It would be ridiculous if we didn't try to learn from each other. But we should also check whether results are valid across different countries. So, here OECD is doing a fantastic job where they're trying to sort of draw on registered data sources from different countries and replicate key findings in influential studies using very similar protocols for different countries to produce exactly results to teach us which results travel across countries and which don't, right? So it would be ridiculous to just ignore findings from other countries, but it would also be a little bit naive to just take them at face value and say, probably, but we have to be smart here. And then I think the smart guy here is Alex, actually. So that's
So I'm going to bounce it back to you, Alexander and Sandrine. What is your comment?
Well, I obviously agree with most of the things Oscar say, apart the smart stuff. But yeah, so we have this network where we so specifically mobilize linked employee data in different countries, so that is information on the employers, but also on the workers, and then try to understand how they work together to create values, how they share the benefits of what they produce, so with wage setting, how it works, and how they meet, so how the workers move across firms, and so we try to collect all kinds of stylized facts on that. And I think it's very useful. And so, yes, so some of the things they carry over. So we see that the role of firms in wage setting is quite important, but perhaps not as important as in the United States. So you see that the role of firms for wage inequality in countries with more established system of collective bargaining, such as Sweden, tends to be less important than in the United States. The effects of local labor market concentration. They also seem to be larger in countries where there are no countervailing institutions, and than in European countries with more established collective bargaining systems. So so this cross-country things allows you to establish sort of what is true everywhere. Yes, so labor markets are imperfectly competitive. We can clearly see it in the data, but we can also see differences, and we'd like to go in much more detail to understand that.
Okay, so the OECD, just to come back to why we're having a seminar about the OECD developments, you're supposed to spearhead the economic policy debate based on viable, high-quality research. But you in the panel, how much weight does the policy recommendations of the OECD carry in the public debate? How important are they, and are institutions like the OECD facing challenges now in a growing fact-resistant world, more polarized public debate. What are your takes? How important is this? You can start, Adnan, since this is your job to make them listen to the trade unions.
Thank you. Yeah, I believe that OECD has played a tremendous role in influencing labor market policies around OECD countries and even beyond the OECD countries. Especially the 94 job study played a significant role. Unfortunately, the two later ones have not been so influential in the public debate and the national policy making as the 94 report. And I believe that many of the recommendations from the 94 report still continue to influence and dominate the public debate in many countries, including in Sweden, where we see that the liberal and right-wing job labor market agenda with arbetslinjen is still highly present. And I would say also that in the 2018 report is quite ambiguous. We say that there's been a quite remarkable shift, and we welcome it. But still, if you look at the details in the report, you see that there are quite two rather distinct narratives in the report, and where the OECD even says that you should avoid excessively rigid employment protection, for example. And this ambiguity, this leads to pick and choose, a room for pick and choose for policymakers, where they can choose the best recommendations from both models, and also it opens the door for a reversal back, actually, to the 90s. We also are already sensing it at different OECD committee meetings. For example, the Economic Policy Committee in April, where we saw that the regulation of labor market and product markets and simplification was very high on the agenda. So I'm quite scared about the OECD recommendations in the coming years, since we're sensing this reversal already.
If the last minute here, Sandrine, maybe you would like to comment on this. What do you feel that your this policy-oriented debate that you're trying to have, is it more challenging today? Is it harder to make an impact?
It's a difficult question. I wanted to react and follow up to what was said before, because I don't think we are not promoting a one-size-fits-all model. I mean, also for collective bargaining, like not saying that now one need to export the Swedish model to France or I don't know what. I think what we've been trying really to do is precisely, notably for in Europe, for sectoral bargaining model, to advocate that systems that may look different may actually yield to same good results, while systems that superficially, or let's say, from the outside looked similar, yield to different results. So that was really to document and show that there are a number of ways to achieve good outcomes. And in my last slide, when I was really, we are really advocating for this balance between flexibility and security in the collective bargaining systems. Well, to have like a high coverage, you can have different really ways to reach this, including, through, let's take the case of France. We had these automatic extensions that they were kind of reformed because it was too much of a straitjacket, let's say, for firms. So we are really trying in these different, let's say, parameters to come to this balance. But I would really not agree that we are trying to promote one model, which would be the Scandinavian model. Yeah.
Yes.
Can I just follow up? Because I found this discussion about the difference between 1994 and 2018 very interesting. So I totally agree that the 1994 strategy was much more influential. It was also much more political. By comparison, the 2018 strategy is very technocratic. And that's a weakness because it's much less influential, which is a problem. But it's also a strength because it takes the discussion outside of the political domain. And by looking at the details and trying to understand how things work without bringing ideology in, it's actually possible to make progress. So it's maybe in smaller steps and it's less radical, but there's something positive to it as well. But of course, if it's not influential or not being used enough, that's a problem. So it's a challenge to marry these two different things. I'm not sure we have found the right mix between the two, but I think there is something to this more technocratic approach because it allows you to make progress in a way that is less partisan, if you like.
Is there any last comments from the panel? All right. I thank my wise men, and I thank you, the audience, and I welcome you back here in half an hour. Before you applaud, apparently we have a little bit of a cancellation of Anna Stansbury, who's the lead, was the presentation of the macroeconomic effects of weak labor power, but we have an excellent panel, and we will still have the session. So you're most welcome back, but so you just so you know, can be transparent about that. Thank you, Alexander and Sandrine, and now let's give everyone an applause.